All right, today we're cracking open a book by Dr. Samuel James that takes a deep look at the Quran, but from a very specific angle, a historical and textual critique from a Christian perspective. Our job here is to walk you through the key arguments he makes, slide by slide.
So right off the bat, the author sets the stage by highlighting just how high the stakes are. You've got two of the biggest religions on the planet, Christianity and Islam, and they're built on two different books. The author argues that these books make claims about God, about history, and about our very salvation that just can't both be true. And this gets us to the central problem, at least as Dr. James lays it out. He says the Bible and the Quran aren't just telling slightly different versions of the same story. They're presenting conflicting realities that are fundamentally incompatible. We're not talking about minor details here. We're talking about the very bedrock of each faith.
To really hammer this point home, the author goes straight to the single most important event in Christianity, the crucifixion. He points out that the Quran, in this one verse, doesn't just reinterpret the cross. It completely denies it happened. It says Jesus wasn't the Son of God and that he was never even killed. This, he argues, is a head-on contradiction that changes everything.
Okay, so with that huge contradiction on the table, the author starts to break down what he calls the pillars of the standard Islamic narrative. And the first one he wants to test is the claim that the Quran we have today is a perfect, completely unaltered copy of the original.
Now, this traditional belief has a name. It's called tawatur, or perfect preservation. It's an absolutely foundational idea in Islam, that there is only one version of the Quran, that it's never been changed by even a single letter, and that it's a perfect copy of a book that exists in heaven.
But here's where the author starts to push back. And interestingly, he uses Islamic tradition itself to do it. He points to this account where, about 2 decades after Muhammad's death, the leader of the community, the Caliph Uthman, had to create a standardized Quran. Why? Because Muslims from different parts of the empire were actually fighting with each other over which version was the right one.
And this leads to what the author sees as a critical, logical question. Think about it. If you're trying to prove there's only one, single, unified version of a text, you don't go around burning all the other copies. He argues you only burn evidence that contradicts your claim. The very act of burning, he suggests, is a huge red flag that there were other competing versions out there, even among Muhammad's closest followers. And he says this isn't just ancient history. He points out that even today, there isn't just one Arabic Quran. There are multiple officially recognized versions. For instance, in most of the world, the text says angels are the servants of God. But in North Africa, their official Quran says the angels are witnesses of God. Those aren't just different ways to say the same thing, they're different words with different meanings.
So after questioning the perfect text idea, the author moves on to pillar number 2. And this is the claim that the Quran is a totally unique revelation from God, that its stories came straight from heaven and weren't influenced by any human sources.
Now, the traditional argument here is pretty powerful. Islam teaches that Muhammad was illiterate. So the thinking goes, how could he possibly have come up with all of these intricate stories about past prophets and events? The only explanation, according to the narrative, is that God must have revealed them to him.
To put this to the test, the author zooms in on a really famous story in the Quran that you won't find in the Bible. It's this incredibly dramatic scene where the prophet Abraham is thrown into a giant furnace for smashing idols, but God miraculously saves him by making the fire cool.
But, and this is the author's aha moment, it turns out this exact story appears in Jewish folklore, in a text called the Midrash Rabbah, which was written centuries before the Quran. For the author, this is a smoking gun. It suggests the story wasn't a brand new divine revelation, but a retelling of a popular tale that was already floating around in the Middle East.
And this isn't just a one-off example. It actually forms the basis of what the author calls his borrowing theory. He argues that when you really dig into it, you can find parallels for Quranic laws in Jewish legal texts, for its stories of Jesus in rejected Christian gospels, and even for its descriptions of heaven and hell in ancient Zoroastrian myths. So we've looked at the preservation and the origin. That brings us to the third and final pillar the author examines, the claim that the Quran, being the literal word of God, is totally free from any and all mistakes, whether historical or scientific.
And this is a really big deal. The claim isn't just that it's mostly right, it's that it's absolutely flawless. I mean, if the book is the eternal speech of an all-knowing creator, it can't possibly get facts wrong about the world he created, right? That's the logic.
So how do you test a claim like that?
Well, one way the author does it is by looking for anachronisms. It's kind of a fancy word, but all it means is something that's out of place in time. Like finding a smartphone in a movie about ancient Rome. It just doesn't belong there.
And the biggest example of this that the author presents is a real historical puzzle. In the Quran, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is called the sister of Aaron and the daughter of Imran. The thing is, the biblical figure who was the sister of Aaron and the daughter of Amram, which is Imran in Arabic, was Miriam, and she lived about 1,500 years before Mary. The author's argument is that the Quran has mixed up two different women who lived a millennium and a half apart.
And it's not just history. The author also looks at scientific claims, pointing to verses like this one, which talks about a great traveler who found the place where the sun sets, and it was in a spring of muddy water. He argues this reflects the worldview of someone living in the 7th century, not the timeless knowledge of a divine creator.
Okay, so textual variants, borrowed stories, anachronisms, where is the author going with all this? Well, for him, all these critiques, textual, historical, and scientific, they all build up to a massive theological conclusion, that the God described in the Bible and the God described in the Quran are not the same being. And he really boils it down to the character of God himself. He argues that the Bible presents God as a loving father, one who actively pursues a relationship with humanity and whose love is unconditional, even for sinners. By contrast, he argues the Quran presents God as a distant master, whose love is conditional. It's something you have to earn by being righteous first.
And the author frames his entire analysis in this spirit. He's basically saying that if something is truly true, if a book is really the eternal word of God, you should be able to poke it and prod it and ask hard questions, and it should hold up. Truth, he says, isn't afraid of a little pressure.
Which leaves us with this final pretty profound question that the author poses. If what he calls cracks in the Quran's foundation, its claims to be perfectly preserved, uniquely revealed, and totally inerrant, if those cracks really are there, he says they lead to a completely different theological building, a different God, a different way of salvation. And the big question he leaves us with is, what does a divide that deep actually mean for any kind of meaningful understanding between these two faiths?